Loyalists are the most well-known faction in this game. They are also the most standard one, yet that does not mean that they don't have a few concepts that they showcase, and mainly only they. Being purely lawful, over relying on a single damage type, and having a unit structure that is basically a reversal of what orcs have. But I will also use Loyalists to explain what an offensive unit might be. So let's start with being purely lawful. It comes with few implications. They can't really attack first. Yes, there are some maps where the cavalry can do something, but generally it can be risky and later provides less staying power when defending. Getting that out of the way, Loyalists are almost always defending at the very start, and in general, the more lawful faction is, the more often it will be defending first. So, having that out of the way, before I can address the other points, I think it would be good to go through the units first. They can be basically divided into standard units, offensive units, and something in between. So we have the water flying unit, Merman Fighter, a pierce damage swimmer. We have the main unit, Spearman, ranged attack, first strike, decent HP pool, good all around unit, and also pierce damage dealer. Scout, the cavalryman, and also a unit that is a bit more an offensive one than defensive one. Next we have the plethora of offensive options that Loyalists have. Mage, to deal with high defense targets and having great damage to cost ratio, when we include magical. Horseman, to deal with anything that does not punch back hard, or suicide charges, countered by pierce resistance, as it also deals pierce damage. Fencer, to ignore Zoc and run around annoyingly or help and finish off important to kill units. Heavy infantryman, well, it also is offensive impact damage dealer. So while the other units don't really need an explanation why, what exactly makes high offensive? It has a lot of resistances, right? Yeah, that is true. However, not every type of resistance can actually be called defensive. In case of high, it has two very high resistances and the others are close or at zero, which creates a big gap between what high resists and everything that actually counters it. So when the initiative is in your hands, you can just pick a target, and that won't deal a lot of damage to it. However, when the initiative is in enemy hands, well, enemy will either avoid it or just use counter against it. But that's not all. Another part of high not actually being defensive is very low variance in terrain defenses, meaning high has 30% chance to dodge on flat terrain, but usually only gets 10% defense improvement when standing on some type of good terrain like hills or forest, and it is actually really hard for it to even get there due to its low movement points and high movement costs. Finally, why it can be considered offensive unit? Well, that's entirely due to low amount of high damage attacks, which can with some luck help you break through the enemy lines. These traits can also be found on horses of Loyalists, and in particular horsemen, which honestly is quite upsetting for high, as horseman is just better in many situations also due to its way higher speed. And then we have bowmen, a unit that has gotten quite a few buffs but still is not nearly used as much as spearman. And yes, it would be possible to buff it into usability, but that would mean just overpowering spearman and not really finding its place. Spearman simply is better fit for the myriad of offensive units Loyalists have, as bowman being ranged does not deal nearly as much damage in retaliation, and that also hurts its HP, as ranged damage does carry some penalties, as you don't take as much damage in return usually. it also deals mainly pierce damage. And we are already on topic, let's tackle the unit structure. For orcs, everything supports Garand, but here Spearman is supporting everything as the only truly not even defensive but rather universal unit, perhaps just a bit on the defensive side. Next are matchups, and starting with Undead and Elves, as both of those really exploit the pierce weakness that Loyalists have. Elves with Woos, which makes Loyalists need to get way more cavalrymen, fencers and mages, yet spearmen and other units still can be seen and used reasonably effectively. And they need that, as without Woos, this matchup could easily turn into fighter versus spearman spam with some mages and scouts, which would be much less fun. Undead make Loyalists reject spearman in favor of horseman, cavalryman, fencer and mage, which is not very defensive, but while it can be quite effective, it also tends to be more swingy for both parties. Then on the opposite end we have Druids, where spearman is usually quite useful unit. Unless you face Saurian spam, in which case not really, but usually you will be facing a mix of enemies with a mix of units of your own. A bit more neutral matchups are orcs, which are already explained a bit, dwarves who don't have a direct spearman counter and that kinda hurts them a lot, and the Dunefolk who deal with them directly, well, due to 20% pierce resistance on Dune Soldier. I guess in the end it's more of a concept explaining video than anything else, but I hope you still liked it, and I will see you next time. Cheers!